Hey, this is Johnny Dwinell with Daredevil Production, and you're listening to the business side of music with Bob Bender, the one and only.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
On the show with us today here in Nashville, Tennessee, it's always nice to have people in the studio. Randy Barber is joining us. Randy has worked in radio promotions, taking an independent artist under his wing who went on to earn five consecutive top 20 singles on the Music Row Country Breakout Chart, making that artist the most played independent artist in the history of that chart. That in itself is pretty noble. He's also held the roles of booking agent, along with advancing dates, tour management, merchandising, and consulting. We call that a person who wears many hats.
All of them.
In 2013, Randy went to work for Curb Records, which is my old stomping grounds, to oversee their secondary market promotions. While there, he worked hands-on with Dylan Scott, Morgan Fraser, and a buddy of mine, Tim Duggar. After 2 years, Randy left the label to start his own private promotion and consulting firm, Bar Frog Music, which I think is a very cool name for a company.
Thank you.
His company oversees several different aspects of development for his artists, depending on their individual needs, from radio promotion, music promotion, management, to career strategy. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Good to have you here. I always like to ask our guests, how did you get started in the business?
Well, I moved to Nashville. It's been about 23 years ago. I'm from just outside Little Rock, Arkansas, and I moved here to be a songwriter. That's what brought me here. I'd always played music, played guitar for other people, and wrote songs. And said, you know what, I'm gonna give it a shot. And I came here 23 years ago and
never left.
Yeah. So this is home now. I mean, I met my wife here. I've settled down, and so.
How was songwriting back then? Because that's obviously one of the things we're going to talk about how it is today, but how was it back then?
Man, I enjoyed it. You know, it took me a few years to kind of get into the groove once you get here, and because, you know, you can write songs there, but when you get here, you're exposed to a whole nother level of you know, what I thought was a good song 30 years ago wasn't. And so it took being around some of that, and you see these people, and you're like, oh, I've either got to go home and quit, or I got to get better myself. And so you learn, and the practice of sitting down with people every day and going to a room, somebody you may not have ever met, and having to write every day. You learn the craft, and you learn, okay, we may not write a great song every day, but we're going to go through the process every day. And so that helped me grow, and I learned so much about other things, you know, production and that kind of thing, just from writing.
A lot of people don't realize that when you come to Nashville to be a songwriter, first of all, it's all A team here. There's no B teamers. Right. And the other thing is what you said is sometimes you wind up in a songwriting appointment with someone you've maybe never met before.
Right.
What's that like?
You know, writing is a very intimate thing. And sometimes because you're sharing something that you're creating. And so it can be really intimate. And so it's a learned process. The first time you do it, it's going to be uncomfortable. And it was for me, you know, when I started. And I learned, because before I got here, I'd never written with anybody else.
Were you just you had no co-writers when you lived in Arkansas?
No, because nobody wrote songs. I mean, I played in bands and played guitar for other people, but most people didn't write. And so, you know, I felt like I was out on an island writing songs by myself. And so I get here, and that's the whole culture is everybody writes together. Oh, hey, let's get together and write. Let's do it. So that was kind of the culture of what was going on here. And so I had to learn how to do it. And it's a learned process. You learn how to share and not be afraid to share, because you may say something that you feel like is absolutely stupid, but that stupid thing you said sparks something in the other person.
Yeah.
And so you
And
learn.
before you know it, you may have a hit on your hands.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I get it. We're going to talk about, among many things, your company is Bar Frog, which I think is a cool name. You actually recently finished production on an animated children's series called The Bar Frogs.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a really fun thing that I had done. I have a niece, and she's grown now, but it originally started because she always wanted these Barney. She always liked Barney and the little songs, and she'd watch these little Barney videos. And so I always learned to play the little songs for her. And I got to thinking, my company is Bar Frog Music. My last name's Barber. And I had a lamp on my desk. It was a frog playing acoustic guitar. And I said, okay, that's what's the name of my company's going to be. I had this idea, well, what if that little frog had a band? And they were called the Bar Frogs. And because it's all me, I wrote it and financed it all myself, I hired an animation company here, not far from here, Lebanon Pike, called Magnetic Dreams, did the artwork for me. They do mostly animation for video games and stuff, but I worked with one of their artists to create the characters. And it's a band of 5 little frogs, and they play children's songs. Like one of the songs that I'm getting ready to release it probably in late October is called Skunky Monkey. Take a bath, Skunky Monkey. And these frogs, they all have unique personalities, and I've recorded 7 songs that I wrote, and I'm going to release them out one at a time for over the next 7 months, and see if we can't get some traction through some marketing across TikTok and YouTube, and also trying to work some playlists on Spotify. Try to see if I can't just spark some interest in it.
In addition to that, publishing, and you have traveled down that road. Now, I will tell you, in the past, we've had people talking about publishing on the show, and honestly, I kind of get that glazed deer in the headlight look because it's complicated. And I think, at least for you and I, today, we're going to kind of approach it, as you said in the notes you sent me, from that kind of that 30,000-foot view of publishing and the different types of publishing, different types of royalties. Do you mind if we go down that path for the next 3 or 4 hours?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
Because that's about what it would literally take.
Well,
when we talk about publishing royalties, there's the mechanical, there's the performance. The PROs get involved, which is performing rights organizations such as CSAC and BMI and ASCAP. And honestly, the reality is it's geared for the major artists. It's not really it's not set up for the independent artist. But can the independent artist get in that world and be successful?
Well, I think that there have been some disruptions in the marketplace in the past several years that have changed the game for the independent artists, that kind of loosened the grip that the major labels had on that. If you look back, just that 30,000-foot view of royalties, the performance royalties is what was the bulk of what artists got paid. Those performance royalties, when we talk about that, we're talking about radio, we're talking about television, and their live performances. And the radio was always skewed towards the major labels. The reason being is the way they track the airplay and the way they determine how they're going to pay out those royalties it really changed in 1988 when MediaBase came into play, and they had a tracking system. Well, basically what they did is they took anywhere from 150 to 180 stations across the country, but it was the major stations in the major markets. and they monitored their airplay. Now, all of these stations were all combined together to create a chart of the most popular songs. Well, that kind of one feeds the other, because if all these stations are being fed in and their most popular songs become a chart, they pay attention to what's on that chart, so they're going to play the stuff that's at the top of that chart more. So it gets less and less songs get airplay.
Right.
And well, what happens is the data that's collected, that's what the PROs, your ASCAPs and BMIs, use to determine which songwriters get paid. Now, there are pockets in the country where they're not necessarily playing on the radio exactly what's on that top 40 or top 20 or whatever that station decides. For example, Texas is a really good example of it. You've got radio stations that do their own thing because the music scene is very diverse there. And so you have artists that are getting a lot of airplay, but they're not showing up in that chart, and so they're not getting paid. The guys at the top, the Taylor Swifts, the Blake Sheltons, the what have you, are getting overpaid because they're not. That snapshot of these 150 stations is not necessarily a good example of what's going on across the country.
It's not necessarily a correct correlation, I would think.
Yeah. And so these guys are getting overpaid, and the independent guys who have worked really hard and developed relationships at radio, have developed followings, all right, that they're not getting paid for their performance royalties. So that goes on for, 30 years, basically from 1988 when MediaBase kind of started this, but then came along Spotify. 2011, Spotify comes to America. And it takes time for that to get adopted and for people to change their consumption habits of music. I'm 52. I don't know, Bob, how old you are, but I know when I was a kid, I had two choices when it came to music. I either had to buy it at the record store or I had to sit and wait on it to be played on the radio. Well, people don't consume music the same way anymore. Most people, they decide, I want to go listen to this, and they go find it on Spotify, YouTube, what have you, and they listen to it.
It's pretty much music on demand. Well, in fact, it is actually music on demand these days. And I'm one of those guys that has a Spotify account, and I download my favorite albums. And, I was in the car yesterday going, well, I want to listen to this record. And then I was in the car today, and I want to listen to that record. And, based on your musical taste at that point, that's what you're going to listen to. And no commercials. You're not listening to a DJ. And I agree with you. When I was a kid, that's how you listen to your music. You either went to the store and bought, of course, I'm older. We'd buy 45s if we liked the song. And then if you flipped it over and you liked the B-side, then you'd go out and you'd buy the album. Mm-hmm. Or you'd sit in your car or in your bedroom and listen to, and back then, early days for me, high school years, it was AM radio before FM came into existence from a rock and roll or a country music standpoint. And you had to wait and hope that they played the song that you liked.
Yeah, I remember being in probably 9th or 10th grade. My parents bought me this tape deck for Christmas, and I could record songs off the radio.
You were uptown.
Oh, man, I thought I had it made, and then you took that cassette tape and you'd stick it in your car and listen to it. But to me, the thing now that's changed is there's no gatekeeper. Like with radio, you had gatekeepers, you had the program directors who determined what was being played and what you heard, and it was kind of force-fed to you. It was now, who decides what you're going to listen to? You do.
So how does the independent artist get ahead of that curve and make money, especially through the PROs?
There's two sides of royalties. The performance that we talked about that are paid out by your PRO or a performance right organization. But there's also what's called mechanical royalties. And in the past, those were minor compared to your performance royalties because they were only based on physical sales. Well, love him or hate him, in 2019, President Trump signed a new law into effect called the Music Modernization Act. And basically, because of the change that Spotify and these other digital service providers brought in, this law changed how mechanical royalties were treated. And they forced the digital service providers to pay a blanket mechanical license, a big fee every year to be able to use these properties that they didn't own. Basically pay rent on these properties that they're leasing out, And they set up what's called the Music Licensing Collective. That's the one that basically handles the U.S. There's others. They're called collective management organizations, but they're across the world. Like there's one in Canada, the Canadian Musical Reproduction Rights Agency. But these are set up, and those monies are paid into them, and then you have to go register with these agencies and claim your song. To me, as a songwriter, I know personally, I have some songs that have just continued over the years to produce a little bit of income. About whatever I get from my PRO, I can usually think for each quarter about 3 times that amount is what I'm going to get on the mechanical side.
Wow.
So there's much more money in the mechanical side of it. And there are no gatekeepers telling you can't be on streaming. You can't get people to listen to your music. And so that's what's changed, is the streaming has totally changed the game. And, they still have to get people to listen to it, because you're not going to get paid if it doesn't stream. But so you've got to find creative ways. But I think that the independent artist has been more creative out of necessity to learn how to get people, to drive people to their music. The playlist, trying to work some of the playlists that are out there to drive traffic, to drive volume. There's certainly opportunities to get the music heard, especially on social media, using the different aspects there to try to get people involved. But then you're driving people to that, and that's driving your mechanical royalties. So I think that's the big change. That's the big difference. But the big issue that I think that's happening right now is that there's what's called black box royalties, and these are royalties that are sitting there, but they're unclaimed. Yes, the government has set up the system to where these are there, they're being accounted for, but they're not looking for you. They're not looking for the artist. Artist has to be proactive and go find them. From what I've read, there's approximately $4 billion worth of unpaid royalties sitting out there across all the different agencies.
We're going to take a break, get a word in for a couple of our sponsors that support this show. And when we come back, we're going to have some more conversation with Randy Barber. And I definitely want to dig in a little more on this black box unpaid royalties, because you said there's $4 billion in unpaid royalties that needs to be going somewhere.
You're listening to the business side of music.
It may have been Tammy Wynette who sang Stand By Your Man, but it was actually Nancy Jones who stood by the legendary George Jones for more than 30 years and helped bring him to the light. Now in her new book, Playin' Possum, readers get an intimate look at the country music legend through the eyes of his wife and partner. Nancy knew George Jones better than anyone. The good and the bad, the horrendous and the hilarious. Married in 1983, George quit his wild and wicked ways for a while, but Nancy learned all too soon that there were demons holding a strong grip on the man she loved. People who knew the possum credit Nancy's tenacious love, faith, and encouragement for saving George's life and rebuilding his career. For the first time in Playin' Possum, Nancy Jones reveals the true insider perspective and little-known stories about the country music legend, his battles with cocaine, alcohol, abusive behavior, battles with himself, and against the demons that sought to control and destroy him. Read the compelling first-hand account from the woman who refused to give up on George Jones. Playin' Possum is available now. Order your copy today from nancyjonesbooks.com, Amazon, and more. As a musician, you have a dream, that vision of what success looks like for you. Though it's not only about the money, money is part of it. Whether you've been extremely successful or you're just striving to maintain a regular cash flow, you need a plan. Money Concepts can help you develop a customized plan to achieve the financial stability and success you want. For over 40 years, Money Concepts has been providing holistic financial planning services to individuals, families, and business owners. As an independent firm, Money Concepts and their associates are committed to always represent the best interest of the client. It's really about a committed, benevolent interest in them personally. This independence, coupled with that committed, benevolent interest, means they represent you, the client, not a product supplier. It's not about selling products, it's about helping you achieve success. To learn how this can benefit you, contact my buddy, John Adams, with Money Concepts at 737-867-9309. That's 737-867-9309. You can also email John at jadams@moneyconcepts.com.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio here in Nashville, Tennessee, another episode of the business side of music. Randy Barber with Bar Frog Music is sitting across the table. Before we took our break, we were talking about the black box unclaimed royalties, which in itself, that name black box sounds a little ominous when you think about it. $4 billion, you said estimated $4 billion in unpaid royalties. Who is owed that money? I know it's the artist, or at least the owner of that content, but is it majority of major artists, or is it independent artists, or is it both? And let me preface that by saying, typically the major artists, they've got a record company behind them, they've got management, they've got publishing. So you would hope that those entities would be doing their homework.
Oh, I'm sure that the major labels, they have publishing sides that handle all of the administration on the publishing. And so I would say that most of the money that's sitting out there is independent songwriters and independent artists who just don't realize that they have to go and register and set all of that up.
They pretty much have to do the homework. Because no one else is going to do it for them.
And nobody's going to tell them, because like the MLC, the Music Licensing Collective, which is the company that was set up when the government changed the law.
And that's the one here in the States?
Yes, sir. Okay. It's actually here in Nashville, the MLC. And it's themlc.com. That's their website. They have over $1 billion. They admit there's over $1 billion at the MLC that's unclaimed. Nobody's advertising, hey, artists, hey, songwriters, you need to go do this. Now, if you'll dig into it, you can find it. You can get online and you can research it and you can find what to do. But the problem is people don't know that. They're busy. They think most artists that I know, most of my songwriter friends that I know, when I went to them and said, hey, guys, are you set up with this? Oh man, I'm BMI. I'm good. And so they don't even realize when I went and set mine up. It's about a year ago when this really hit home for me, and I went to do it. I got my first check was $2,000 of back royalties because they backed up to when they started in January 1, 2021. Now, in theory, they're supposed to go back farther than that once they get everything set up.
Get caught up with everything.
From January 1, 2021 to when I put in my first thing, it was $2,200, my very first payment from them.
That's not chump change.
No. And I get a check every month. I get paid every month. It's direct deposit. It's the only way they do it. I get paid every month from the Music Licensing Collective. But most people don't even realize that this happened, that they need to. And so money's just sitting there. It's being left on the table. Now, it's not that I blame the MLC or these other companies, because you think about it, that's how they're probably surviving, is the interest off of those unclaimed royalties. But if it's mine, I'd rather me hold on to it than them.
Well, and I would think at the same time, there's got to be thousands of songwriters out there. And to get that system of checks and balances to literally reach out, that in itself would be, I would think, almost a 24/7 job trying to locate those. So once again, let's get back to what I said earlier. This is up to the independent songwriter to do their homework.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and it's changed because with streaming, it used to be there were only so many songs that were going to go to radio. It was mathematically restrictive because there are only so many songs that the radio stations are going to play.
And that playlist has gotten shorter and shorter and shorter.
And it can be 25 songs on the station's playlist. But if you weren't involved with the machine, the machine at the major label, if you weren't involved with that, then you didn't really have a shot at having a song that was going to create and generate substantial royalties. Well, now there's artists you've never heard of who have hundreds of millions of streams, and that's real money. That's legitimate money. If you wrote one of those songs and it had 20 million streams, that's real money. I, for example, I have a song that I wrote. There was an artist, and he's not a household name by any means. His name's Jacob Bryant, and I think the song's been recorded 3 times, but his version has got about 9 million streams on it. I get paid every month on it. And this was a song that he released in 2017. I'm still getting paid monthly on it.
Now, is that through the Music Licensing Collective?
Yeah.
Yeah. So once again, not chump change, especially when you're talking about 9 million streams.
Right.
And I think we look at other artists out there today, the big news, anybody that's in the music business. We're all talking about Oliver Anthony, who had the one huge hit. Independent artist, came out of nowhere, got a #1 hit on the Billboard charts, which was definitely something that nobody thought would ever happen. And no management, no representation. And that's a perfect example of where lightning can strike. And if you're not prepared, you're not ready. You better start looking in that black box.
Well, you don't have to have anyone's permission anymore. When I moved here, 23 years ago, everybody was chasing the elusive record deal.
Right.
Because that was your entry if for an artist, or as a songwriter, you wanted to cut by someone on a record label, because that was your entry into the game. Whereas now, you don't need anyone's permission. You can create and release and promote music all by yourself online and create great followings. Some of the biggest names out right now, you talked about Oliver Anthony. Zach Bryan is another example who blew up online, and then all of a sudden his music is everywhere.
Chris Stapleton was another one.
Sure.
They just come out of nowhere.
And you look at Cody Jinks, been super successful, but these are guys that didn't have the machine behind them. Well, Chris Stapleton did, but it took some other things. It took him being on the awards show with Justin Timberlake for things to open for him. And but now you don't have to have permission. You don't need that machine to be able to generate streams. Those streams generate income, so it completely leveled the playing field, and it weakened the radio and the ability of the major labels to break artists, because people don't discover artists the same way they did. I'm growing up in North Little Rock, Arkansas, and I'm listening to KSSN, which is a big country radio station, and I hear a song by a new artist, Tim McGraw. Well, I keep hearing it. First time, I don't think anything of it. By about the 10th time they played it, I'm sitting there, Indian Outlaw, half Cherokee and Choctaw, whatever it was. But it got forced down you, and guess what? They eventually become a big star.
And they make you go out and buy the record because you've heard that. And you go, okay, now I actually like that song. I want to have it in my library.
Oh, sure. And it's just familiar with you. Well, it's different now, because people don't consume the radio the way they used to. And so people don't discover new artists via the radio as much. It's more online through friends, social media, different things. And so it's totally leveled the playing field.
You've got Spotify that if you're listening to this artist, you might like this artist.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of that is still major artist, major label correlated, but some independent artists are starting to get discovered at the same time, I would think.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that, people do a better job now of driving their own music. The artists are more active on the social media, and it's become more, the way they're handling social media is different. Radio was broadcast media, one to many, right? And so you broadcast this, and then it goes out to everybody. Social media is fundamentally one-to-one. And so it's got to be personal and relevant to whoever's watching it. So if I don't connect with that person one-to-one, or I don't give them something that's valuable as an artist, they're not interested. And I think that the big difference too nowadays is that you get to see inside of what's going on with this artist. You see the process.
You start getting that intimate look.
Mm-hmm.
I know, in fact, that an artist that I worked with years ago recently did a live stream on Facebook, and I made some comments on it. Oh, it's great to see you. I'd love to know that you're doing well. That night, I got a message from that artist. It's a pretty substantial major artist who said, "How you doing? Haven't heard from you in a long time." And the next day, I get a friend request and wants to know what's going on in my life. And you're right. Now it becomes that one-on-one type relationship that really cements the factor that you're going to be listening to their music or at least following their career. And I think radio in the past never allowed that to happen. And I'm not beating up on radio. I think enough people do that. And I myself have done it in the past. But I think now that we have these new tools, these streaming tools, it creates a whole new arena of being able to reach a listener.
Well, I think you feel more connected to the artist. I grew up in a time where artists were they were on a different planet. It felt like that because you didn't really know their lifestyle. So if you saw something in a magazine about them or you saw something on TV about them, it was really interesting because you didn't know them. Whereas now you see these artists and you see you see behind the curtain, and you see the intimate details of their life. You see their family, you see them on the road, and so you feel as if you know them a lot better than you did, when I was in high school and Tim McGraw was coming out. I didn't know who Tim McGraw was, didn't know anything about him. I just heard his songs on the radio.
Right.
And I love radio. Man, I worked in it for years, and I think it's powerful, but it's just people's consumption habits with radio have changed. And we either, as artists, as people in this business, have to adapt, or you're going to fade out.
Yeah.
And, I think that's kind of what's happening.
We're going to take another break, get another word in for a couple of our sponsors. And when we come back, we're going to continue to have some more conversation with Randy Barber.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Since 1963, Korg has been creating new experiences in music and performance. That is what drove the creation of some of Korg's most legendary products, such as the Poly 6, the M1, the Electribe, the Triton, the Minilog, the Kronos, Wave State, Op6, and most recently the Nautilus, which is what we have here in our studio. Korg is dedicated to creating new, innovative, and uncompromising instruments which maintain the highest quality to inspire music makers, past, present, and future. Visit Korg.com or your favorite Korg dealer to get your hands on one of their products and start creating new music always. Korg, the official sponsor of the business side of music.
Whether you consider yourself a musician or not, music is all around us, and it affects our everyday lives. Whether it's background music influencing our shopping habits in a store, organ music adding the vibe to a baseball game, or a playlist convincing us to keep going on that last mile of a run. I'm Mindy Peterson, host of the podcast Enhance Life with Music, where we take a holistic look at music's benefits through the lens of science and medicine, entertainment, and business. us. You can find me and Enhance Life with Music at mpetersonmusic.com/podcast or wherever you get your audio.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio, Randy Barber sitting across the podcast table from us here at Music Dog Studios. During the break, we were talking about how songwriters, artists need to be educated in finding those, what I'm going to call black box monies that's out there. And that's really something that you can help them achieve, right?
Oh, absolutely. I found that most artists don't realize they have money out there. And even once they realize, okay, I need to do this, they don't understand or know enough about the process to do it. There are companies out there, I think the largest one is a company called Song Trust, who's been in the news lately because there was some fraudulent, they got accused of fraud, and several of the digital service providers have stopped working with them.
With Song Trust.
Because there was some fraudulent activity going on. I'm sure they'll figure all that out. I'm not saying right or wrong, but it was in a big article about 2 weeks ago in the Digital Music News about it. But they offer that service. You pay, I think it's $100 a year. They'll set you up, and then they take 15 to 20% of your collected royalties forever. But they'll do that for you, and they'll administer it for a percentage. If you're a big enough fish that you have a substantial stream of income coming from your catalog, there are some publishers who will handle it for you. But like my instance, I make about $400 a month in royalties. I'm not a big enough fish that a publisher's going to want to mess with that for their 20%.
And that's typically the common songwriter, the typical songwriter that's out there. That's really what they probably are seeing or should be seeing.
Right. And then if you're an artist, there are some of the distribution companies like TuneCore or DistroKid that will do this for you. They charge a upfront fee, usually $100, and then they take 15 to 20% in perpetuity as long as they're collecting that for you. What I have found and what my mission with the artists I work with is I would rather set you up as an artist to be a self-administered publisher. What I do, I charge $750. I go in, I set up all the accounts, get everything going for you, and then it's a one-time thing. When we're finished, I educate you going forward how to add new songs when you release new songs, how to do all this thing, and how to self-administer your catalog. That way I don't constantly have my hand in their pocket. And they do it, it's a one-time thing, and they move on.
If they run into a roadblock or have a question or a situation down the road, but they can still come back to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I've got some clients that I have done this for that to pay me to keep going and update their stuff. But that's an add-on service that I do for them. Most of the time, people are able to just move forward and learn how to do it. Once you take the mystery out of it, it's just paperwork. It's just the tedious part of doing administration.
And it's not the romantic side of it. It's not the pretty side of it. It is the business side of it. But it's something that you have to do. And as that independent artist, that independent songwriter, you really have to learn to rely on yourself and no one else. But at the same time, I would think you need someone along the lines of a Randy Barber to at least point you in the right direction and get you started. Same as if you had an attorney or you had an accountant. You need that entity, that person, that individual to at least get you pointed in the right path.
Well, I always tell artists that it's not hard. It's just a little sophisticated. You have to know what you're doing, and once you figure it out, then okay, I got it. Boom. That's typically what happens when I educate artists on how to handle their administration. I got it. And then if they have questions, they call me. We deal with it. But typically, somebody can learn it because I think music is becoming more and more DIY. It's all people are creating the music themselves without a big studio and without a producer a lot of times. They're releasing it on their own through an independent distributor. They're marketing on their own through their social media. And so there's no reason for in perpetuity for somebody to take 20% off the top of their royalties, because every revenue stream, when you're a musician, every revenue stream counts.
Yeah, it does.
And why give it away if you could learn to do it yourself?
Music Modernization Act. We touched on that briefly. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Okay.
I think that's what helped level the playing field with the streaming and everything. Is now people can actually get paid
for their services, for their work.
For their work, yeah. Because man, so many people that I know that were songwriters, they just felt like, oh yeah, I had a song and it did this, and I never made anything off of it.
But they did, and they just don't know it.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so now, the beautiful thing about the law and the way that the MLC is set up is that you can go back, I think it's all the way to 2014, and pick up back royalties. Now, they're not paying from 2014 to 2021 yet, because they're trying to get everything, the system moving. But eventually, those royalties will be paid out.
Which is a good thing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, man, thanks for having me. I had a great time today, Bob.
What a wealth of information. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
For our listeners out there, if you get a chance, go to our Facebook page, hit like, Business Side of Music. Also go to our YouTube page, The Business Side of Music, and become a subscriber. We've got a lot of really cool things coming up here in the next few months, and we want to make sure that you're on top of it.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound designed by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.
Play something we can dance to.